Good afternoon, everybody, around the table and online. Welcome to the Sisterhood Books and Tea. We're thrilled today to have Trudie back with us, Trudie Mason, our CJAD broadcaster and book reviewer par excellence. Before we start, I would ask the people online. Trudie has graciously offered to answer questions and take comments after her review. So if you are comfortable, please put your questions and or comments in the chat. Before we start, just quickly, the Shaar is offering many programs. Please check the e-letter. There's all kinds of groups and lectures and a lot of different diverse things for everybody, probably. So without further ado, I'm handing it over to you, Trudie.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for the return invitation. I'm very happy to be back with you. And I'm so happy to be here in the same room with you, because the last time I was here, of course, I think there were 3 people here and 3 people there, and the owl in the middle of the table with everyone else at home. So this is so different, a different vibe in the room. It's so wonderful that we have this opportunity to be together, and we're enjoying it while we can. So thank you also for suggesting this book. And I'll start out by saying I love this book. I really love this book. And I was so happy that we're talking today about a Canadian author as well. So preface my remarks with this. I'll repeat. When I am asked to read a book for a review, I try to avoid all spoilers, all reviews, any mentions of the author, any background about the author. I try to avoid any mention of that, because what I love about reading is that sense of discovery you get as you turn each page. And you're wondering, oh, where is this taking me? Oh, this is so wonderful, or oh, this is so horrifying, or oh, this is so emotionally intense. And I just love that sense of wonder that comes to reading a book about which I know nothing. So this is what I try to do. And then after I've read the book, that's when I go and I look for background information about the author and look at what other reviewers have said, and have kind of do a little bit of digging into some of the themes that stayed with me. So I came to the book not knowing anything about Mary Lawson, but obviously, like I'm sure many of you, knowing a little something about the setting that she chose, because if you've ever been to kind of slightly outside of cottage country in Quebec or in Ontario, or probably out west. My younger brother lives in the Paw, Manitoba, and I really picked up a lot of the same feeling from her descriptions of her settings as what I experienced when I visited my brother Rob in the Paw. So I really found myself attracted to the locale in this book from the get-go. But I'm going to start off first by talking a little bit about the author herself, how this book came about, and then go into some of the themes. So for people not familiar with Mary Lawson, as I said, she's Canadian born, but she's lived in England for years and years and years. And I'm going to get into that sense of displacement for her and how she uses it as a springboard for her writing. She was born in 1946, which makes her 76 now. She grew up in Southern Ontario, not in Northern Ontario. She grew up in very Southern Ontario in a town called Blackwell, a farming town, which is near Sarnia, which is kind of at the bottom of Lake Huron, and it's down near Detroit. So that's very, very far south in Canada, as a matter of fact. But her family had a cottage in what she has described in many interviews as Northern Ontario. So when she's been questioned about the locations for her books, because all of them have been basically in and around Northern Ontario, she's talked about it being Northern Ontario, and she said, well, you know, my family since the early 1900s had a property in Northern Ontario, and we used to go and spend our summers there. And she has all these impressions and these fond memories of spending her time in Northern Ontario. And I keep putting the air quotes around that because it turns out her family's cottage was in Muskoka, which is by no stretch of the imagination Northern Ontario. And she has actually admitted that she did an essay for I think one of the Toronto newspapers, the Globe or something like that, where she talked about how she stretched that a little bit, calling it Northern Ontario. It would be like someone from Montreal calling Mont Tremblant Northern Quebec. There's no way. But she says, kind of in her own defense, what you have to understand is, you know, she was born in 48. And so she was going up there post-war and then through the 50s and early 60s before she went away to school and then left for England. So she said the Muskokas then, very, very different from what you might associate with Muskoka now, nowhere near as built up. Her family cottage, while it's actually a pretty big place, was remote. You can still only get there by boat. It has no electricity. It has no running water. So it really was an experience of living in a very, I guess, the equivalent of a Northern Ontario place at that time in, you know, the late 1940s, early 1950s. So she has returned again and again in her works to that location because of her affinity for it. She went to McGill University here in Montreal, actually. She took a psychology degree. She graduated in 1968, and she decided to travel. So she went over to Europe and promptly ran out of money. So when she ran out of money, this was just kind of after the hippy-dippy days. So that would have been, you know, late 60s, early 70s. So she was probably footloose and fancy-free for a while, and then she ran out of money, and she realized she had to get a job. So she put her degree to good use, and she got a job working as an industrial psychologist. You know, at one point she talked about studying the effects on Welsh miners of being exposed to constant heat and stuff like that. So she started working in industrial psychology. She met the man who would become her husband, who is also a psychologist, and she ended up getting married, and they never moved back. She never moved back to Canada. She's lived in England ever since. So I think her impressions of Canada, she has been back on vacation many, many times though, and she still goes up to that family property. She's taken her kids and her grandkids there many times over the years. So she still knows Canada, but I think her nostalgia for that area is reflected a little bit in her writing. It's like her memories were frozen during her childhood experiences in the Muskokas. She and her husband have two sons. They live in a town near London called Kingston upon Thames. And it turns out she's distantly related to Lucy Maud Montgomery, but her writing really didn't start until she was kind of settled down in England. She wasn't one of these people who just dove into writing straight out of university and became a quote unquote writer. She began writing when her boys went to school. Her two boys went to school. And she has said that she started with short stories, and in order to sell her works, she figured she'd better write for a UK audience because she was selling to magazines, UK magazines. And that was kind of sputtering along as a writing career. And then she wrote one story and sent it off to one of her UK magazines, and she set it in Canada. And the editor was very impressed and said to her, you should set all your stories in Canada. You found your voice. When you write about Canada, you're great. So write about that because you really shine. Your writing shines. So she felt that she had found her voice, found her niche, and she didn't think writing about Canada would sell. She was surprised when that story ended up in the magazine. She was really blown away by that. But it kind of gave her the confidence to start writing more about the Canada that she knew. So eventually in 2002, she published her first novel. It took her 5 years to write. It took her 3 years to find a publisher. And I'm going to return to that ordeal of trying to find a publisher a little bit later. And it was published when she was 55. So this is a woman who didn't really find widespread success in fiction, aside from her magazine writings, in novel writing until her mid-50s, which I actually find very, very encouraging for those of us who are looking at kind of switching careers later in life. It's like, all right, it can be done. And Crow Lake, which came out in 2002, ended up being sold and translated. It's sold in 23 countries, translated, multiple languages, New York Times bestseller. She followed that up in 2006 with a book called The Other Side of the Bridge, which was long listed for the Man Booker Prize. And then in 2013, she published Road's End, and it made the New York Times top 10 list for 2013. A Town Called Solace has been quite well accepted. It made the long list for the Booker Prize. So that's usually an indication that it has been accepted to critical acclaim. And as some of us have just been discussing here, if you talk to people, just ordinary people like us, not people who review books for major league prizes, people seem to have a real affection for this book. And so I'm kind of pleased to see that it's been critically acclaimed in more lofty circles than, just me and some of the people here. It's not just us. So in terms of her choosing to write about Canada and finding that success, because all of those books are set in Ontario, she kind of waxed poetic. When I said she has this nostalgia about spending so much time at that family property in Northern Ontario, she wrote, remembering the silkiness of the water, the feel of warm, rough, lichen-covered granite under our feet. All four of us, meaning her and her siblings, have inherited that same profound, unreasoning love for the landscape that brought our parents together, because her mom and dad met because their families both spent time in that part of Muskoka. So, and our author, Mary Lawson, ended up getting married herself at the cottage in that region. So it's really central to a lot of her experiences. And she says, "Why do I write about the Canadian Shield? Simple. When I write about it, I'm there. It's a way of going home. I go there to be." And she's also said, "I've written out of 50 years of homesickness." And I do get that impression. She says that region, or her writing about that region, she says, "It's my solace," if you like to put it that way. So A Town, just to reintroduce our book from those who may have read it a while ago, A Town Called Solace. It's set in 1972 in this fictional town in Northern Ontario. Lawson says the idea for the book, for the plot, came to her as this kind of image that popped into her head out of nowhere. She can't even say where the image came to her from. It wasn't a photograph she looked at or an image she saw on TV or anything like that. But what she saw in her head was a little girl standing at a side window of her home, looking into the side window of the house next door and seeing 4 boxes. So she thought this was kind of like an intriguing image. So she started asking herself questions. It sounds like one of those exercises that they get you to do at writers' workshops, where you have to look at a photo and start writing a story about it. So she started asking questions. Okay, what's in the boxes? Why are they there? Who do they belong to? And why is the girl standing there looking into that other house? And that's how her story developed. And 6 years later, we have a town called Solace. But she admits that writing from this method, and I'm always interested in how authors put their stories together. She says in her next life, she's not going to write like that, because it sounds like a little bit of an ordeal, because she never starts out with a plot. She's not one of these writers that gets the plot first and then dreams up characters who can advance the action. She works the other way around. She starts from like a central image, and then has to figure out her characters and follow them. She says she follows them. She doesn't push them in a direction. She follows them. And so she thinks it must be so wonderful to work toward an ending, knowing where she's headed, you know, in a sensible, logical, methodical way. So she finds her characters first, she finds her stories, and she figures out a way to link them together. So these could be wildly separate people, and she has to figure out how to bring them together. She says it is no sensible way to write. It just has to evolve, meaning the story. I just let it evolve and see at the end if we have a book. Now, one of the other interesting things about A Town Called Solace is that Mary Lawson never intended to write it. She retired as a writer after number 3, her third book. And she thought that she was done with that. She was just going to leave things be. She said, I thought 3 is a good number. Let's leave it at that and do a little bit of nothing. But this was 2013. She found out she didn't like a little bit of nothing. She found it actually anxiety producing to do a little bit of nothing. So she started kicking around the thought of going back to writing. And then this image came to her, and that was kind of her springboard. But it did come slowly in her kind of bass awkward approach to developing a book. It took quite a while. Has she retired again? That's my question when I heard that she wasn't supposed to be writing this one. Has she retired again? Because now I'm kind of hoping to see what's going to come. She says she can't be sure whether there's going to be a 5th novel at all. Which is, I think, kind of keeping in her very organic approach to writing. In terms of the title, A Town Called Solace, this is the other kind of bizarre thing about the way she works, is she chose the title without even knowing if any of her characters were going to find the town a solace. So she didn't even know if she had chosen an accurate title when the title came to her. She said, I don't know why I called it that when I started, because I didn't have a story at the time, and I didn't know that it would provide solace for Liam. Or I guess anyone else. So the town I mentioned is an amalgam. It's a made-up town, but she has said in some interviews that it's a combination of Gravenhurst in the Muskoka region and Little Current on Manitoulin Island in Lake Huron, where her brother lives, and I guess she spent some time there. And in particular, she liked the geography there, because there's a town that runs along the shoreline that we see in some of the action in our book that is kind of a thinking point for Liam. He walks there when he's mulling over stuff. So a brief review of our characters as a little bit of refresher. I've mentioned Liam, who is an accountant who is newly divorced, who knows nothing about Solace, and only goes there because some lady that his parents knew when he was little left him a house up there, and he has to go and get the affairs in order because he intends to sell it. But he's really at kind of a low point, loose ends situation in his life, because his marriage is just broken up, and he up and quit his job. And now he has to kind of go take care of business in this town. A lot of the action, so he's one of our narrators. One of the other of the 3 narrators is Clara, who is 7. She's very nearly 8. I remember when I was little, we used to call that going on 8. I'm going on 8, I'm almost there. whose older sister, who she idolizes, Rose, has run away at the age of 16. Rebellious Rose ran away, and the entire family is in this uproar because Rose is missing and no one knows where she's gone or how she's doing. And it's kind of a terrible situation for the parents and for Clara, who's very upset about this. And then the other narrator is the neighbor whose home Clara is looking into when she sees the boxes, who's named Elizabeth Orchard, who is through the course of our action in hospital, she is, as we have found out, terminally ill with a heart problem, and who narrates the action through conversations she has with her late husband. So we meet him, we meet her, and we have the big reveal, the big surprise about something terrible that she did when Liam was young. That explains why she's leaving him the house and drawing this man that she hadn't had contact with for so many years to the town called Solace. And then along the way, we meet some other interesting characters. We meet Sergeant Barnes, the local kindly cop, who is kind of like a force of good for the characters, trying to find Rose, trying to help that family, keeping an eye on this suspicious character, Liam, who's just come into town. We meet Jim, the handyman, who ends up giving Liam work. We meet his son, Cal. We meet Joe, the ice cream making librarian, who turns into the love interest for Liam. And of course, there's Moses the cat, who kind of drives some of the action, because it's the reason that Clara ends up having to go into that house, is because she's agreed to take care of the cat. By the way, our author, like me, is allergic to cats. So this is not any cat that she has ever owned. It is based on her sister's cat, Moses's. And in terms of a plot summary, I've basically given it to you. We have Clara very, very distraught by the disappearance of her sister, and very upset to see Liam going into this house that, hey, belongs to our neighbor. And why are you in there moving things around and unpacking things, or not packing other stuff up? And we follow the action through our three narrators. So I want to go into a couple of the themes that one of them has to do with packing and unpacking. And I wanted to mention this because these 4 boxes not only were the springboard for the author's telling of this story, when that image popped into her head of the girl looking in and seeing those 4 boxes, but I think that they work on so many levels as symbols in our story for what's going on with our characters. These are the boxes that are kind of the remnants of Liam's old life, his failed marriage, his former job. We don't see what's in them right away. They're kind of a mystery. They're part of the mystery of Liam popping up in this town and in that house. But gradually they're unpacked and we get to see what's in the boxes, and they reveal the circumstances of our story. And I think they also stand for the unpacking of all the angst that Liam is bringing to this. The reflection he's having on what brought him here. I think they're symbolic for the angst going on in the family next door as Clara interacts with those boxes. They're a symbol, actually a kind of a soothing symbol for Clara at one point, when Liam realizes it calms her down if they unpack boxes, and she can unwrap each item and look at each item and be told what this item is and that type of thing. And at one point they repack. She unpacks things that Liam had packed up that belonged to the neighbor Elizabeth Orchard, and then she insists our young protagonist on unpacking them again. And so we have this sense that you can't put things away until you've properly processed them. You have to think about things. You have to examine things. And I think that's also a symbol for how Liam has kind of washed up in this town just all of a sudden, almost on a whim, that he threw what was left of his previous life in Toronto into 4 boxes, and without properly processing and looking at what happened and what brought him to that point. And it's only when he gets there and he starts to examine what had happened in his marriage and the what he had brought to his marriage and what his wife had pointed out about him, and he starts to think about these things and really examine them, that he does the unpacking, that he can start to move on. And we see that reflected in our action, where he kind of opens up to the possibility maybe of another romance, or the possibilities of another maybe lasting romance, as he starts dealing with these items that are coming out of the boxes, and all the things that he had packed up in such a hurry and kind of tucked away in his head, and didn't spend a lot of time doing introspection about. But Clara resists change. She's very upset. Her parents didn't want to tell her, of course, about Elizabeth Orchard's situation and her death. It was hidden from her because they worried about how she would react. And I guess in other parts of her life, she had shown resistance to change. I got the impression that now remembering that our author does have a degree in psychology, and her sister is a clinical psychologist as well, who has done work with kids. I got the impression that in Clara's behavior, she was trying to imply that she has maybe an obsessive I don't want to diagnose, I'm not a psychologist, but obsessive compulsive disorder, or something like that. Like her whole determination to stand at the window looking for a sign, or for her sister Rose to come back. That to me is an obsession. That's a sign that psychologically this is a child who's burdened, and not just by the traumatic departure of her sister. So this notion of packing things away without adequate introspection, unpacking them, and revealing and kind of bringing things out into the daylight. I think we see this kind of consistently. And I think you might also make an argument that some of the other characters are doing something similar. And for example, I was thinking about the handyman's son, Cal, who goes away, leaves Northern Ontario, goes away to study veterinary medicine in Southern Ontario, and it ends up coming back all of a sudden, and he feels he just doesn't fit in. But he talks to Liam and does some thinking, and the next thing you know, he's left to go back to school. And I wonder if something similar didn't happen there. He left, he ran into problems, he didn't think about what was going on, he rushed home, he ran home, and then it was only when he was there and he got some maybe words of insight from Liam and started thinking about things that he was able to go home. So it seems to be a theme for more than one of our characters in the book. I thought it was one of the things that the author was really trying to inject. One of the things our author has said she deliberately put in as a question for us to consider through the actions of her characters in the plot is nature versus nurture. So Mary Lawson has said in an interview that as she was developing her characters, she found Liam the most interesting character to write. And why is this? Because he had a pretty disastrous childhood. And I wondered, what had that done to him? What sort of person is he? What is his nature as opposed to his nurture? And again, I think she's wearing her psychologist hat on this little bit of character development, because as we learn through the flashbacks of Elizabeth Orchard, her conversations with her late husband, and through some of Liam's sparse memories, I mean, he was only 4 at the time of what happened, his childhood was pretty lousy. He had a mother who was completely overwhelmed by her responsibilities, having kids. Liam was the youngest, and then she got pregnant with twins, and that left her very, very kind of distraught and unable to cope. There was the whole episode, although he doesn't really indicate whether he remembered much about the abduction or if he understood that it was an abduction. But he had the experience of kind of being yanked away from this kindly neighbor couple that he had grown to love. And he had even said, I want to live with them now. He told his mother that I want to live with them now. I love them. I don't love you. And yanked back from that, yanked back from what had been his oasis of calm and of love and recognition and the sense that he was important, that which is, I think, what he was getting from the neighbors. That sense that he's the center of attention, he's getting the attention and the nurturing that he craved at age 4, and his mother was not able because of circumstances and maybe her own personality to give him that. So Lawson went into this character wondering how much of what he brought to relationships as an adult and what he brought to his failed marriage, how much of that was the fault of his nature or the fault of his upbringing and his experiences in that family, because the rest of his childhood didn't sound like it was all that fabulous either. And he ended up leaving home pretty young and going off to get an education and really not looking back at all. No warm sentiments about his childhood or his upbringing. So our author admits that she got into an argument with her sister, the clinical psychologist, about this character because she gets a lot of input from this sister in her writing. And they were talking about Liam's psyche and the question of nature versus nurture. And she doesn't clarify exactly what piece of action they were arguing about. But at one point she had a row, as she described it, with her sister over something that was happening in the action with Liam, because his sister insisted he's just not capable of that as an adult person. And Lawson said, I just didn't believe that was inevitable, that he was not capable of that. There's got to be a little room for hope. This is what she was thinking in terms of the development of that character. It's just too terrible otherwise. So after I finished the book and I read that comment from the author, I started thinking about, well, what were they arguing about? Because I'm pretty sure if it was really a fraught conversation, she probably left it in the book because she thought it was key to what she wanted to do with that character. She never clarified what the passage was, but I have a suspicion. Feel free to disagree. We could talk about it at the end. Maybe you think it was something else. But I think she and her sister argued over something that Mary Lawson had Fiona, Liam's ex, saying to him. This is on page 278 in my hardcover copy version of the book. Fiona says to Liam, "You're not capable of love, Liam. You're not capable of trusting anyone, of caring about anyone, of giving yourself to anyone. That's love, and you're not capable of it, and you never will be." So I think and then of course, Liam admits in our book, he has fallen in love with Joe, the ice cream making librarian. So I think that's what the two sisters were arguing about. I think Eleanor was saying he can't fall in love. He's not capable. He already blew one marriage. He's been burned by that. He's had maybe abandonment issues from his childhood. He cannot love. He's not possible. And I think our author, I would love to interview this author, and that would be one of the key questions I would love to ask her. Is this it? Is this what you and your sister argued over? Because, when she says it's just too terrible otherwise, I think that's what she was saying. It's just too terrible to leave this character or any person from a similar kind of upbringing, too terrible to leave them in the situation saying they're not capable ever under any circumstances of love. And I agree, that would be terrible to draw a line under that human being, not capable of love, period. So we see in our action that he does fall in love and he does open up to the possibilities. And I thank Mary Lawson for that, because it does provide hope in our story that, she says there's got to be a little room for hope, because it's just too terrible otherwise. So I think that might be it, that argument. By the way, her sister Eleanor gets 10% of her book proceeds because of the input she provides to Mary Lawson on her books. So that's what she does. She kicks back 10% to her sister for that.
Gave her a kick also.
You think we could talk about that? We'll talk about that. Does she actually deserve a kick? Both of them, psychology experts. So I don't know. I guess psychology is divided on that, about whether, the nature versus nurture question, whether something, maybe the combination of both, can leave you incapable of love, period. The other theme that I wanted to touch on is really the one that hit me here. And that's all the motherhood questions in this story. And I have said that I did not know vulnerability until I had kids. And because I have found it in my experience, once you had, now I had Kaylee, my first, when I was 35 years old. I had been reporting for CJD for years. I had covered some terrible stories. I covered murders and terrible. One of the first stories I ever covered after I started newscasting at CJD, I was a standby reporter on New Year's Day, and it was probably 1986, maybe, or 86. I had been employed at CJD for maybe a month or something like that. Was a house fire on New Year's Day that killed 6 people, including kids. That was one of the very first stories. So I had thought I had become pretty immune to all kinds of terrible stuff over the years of my reporting. And you kind of learn not to internalize it. Then I had kids, and now I internalize everything. And so this terrible story of Rose running away clutched me right here. And I will say this because my daughter, I don't want to tell tales out of school, but our daughter Kaylee will admit she was a challenging teenager. She never ran away, but I'm sure it was close sometimes. And we had some sleepless nights when Kaylee was 14, right up until she left for university when she had just turned 17, because she was also one of these very smart kids who decided she really wanted to go straight from high school into university. So she found the one university anywhere near Montreal that takes Quebec high school students directly out of high school and grade 11, and she went there. So that's why she ended up at the University of Ottawa at right out of high school. So very challenged. And it makes me, it gives me chills to think about what it must have been like for that family to have this 16-year-old run away from Northern Ontario to Toronto and all the dangers they knew down there. And it just, the powerlessness and the inability, kind of, are the police looking for her? What can they do? What are they doing? What, can we remind them? And that just gripped me all the way through. And I was so worried it was going to be a terrible ending. So worried that family would be bereaved, and you would have, 2 heartbroken parents, and Clara scarred for her life at losing this older sister that she loved. So, both Clara and her mother are frantic. The mother is guilt-ridden. Has anyone had a child who does not harbor feelings of guilt? Kevin and I were just talking about this actually just a few days ago. We had our annual State of the Union address, we call it, for our wedding anniversary. We had put off our wedding dinner until we could go out to actually eat in a restaurant because our anniversary is October. So we finally got it done. And we had a little State of the Union chat at our annual anniversary dinner, saying, okay, so, how are things going with us? Where are we going? And so we're doing our State of the Union assessment. And I said, at this point, because now I just turned 60 this year. So now we're kind of on the slide, Kev 61, we're on the slide down to retirement. So I said, as we position ourselves up until this point, do you have any regrets? And he looked at me, he said, the only regrets I have are my failings as a parent. So, and it's true. I mean, they're really I don't have any big career regrets. I certainly don't regret marrying Kev. We're 29 years. It'll be 30 next year. I have no regrets that way. All my regrets that really, really bother me all have to do with the kids and areas where I know that I failed or I could have done better. So I really identified with this mother who must have been guilt-ridden and thinking, what did I do that drove her away? Will I pay the ultimate price? Will she pay my ultimate price, or the ultimate price for my failings, perhaps as a parent? So, and we see the mother Diane sink slowly into depression as the days drag on, and she takes to her bed, and so she's not paying a lot of attention to Clara. And I thought that portrait was very, very sharply drawn. We see Elizabeth Orchard, the neighbor, has several experiences with miscarriages, and she and her husband longing to have kids and not able to have kids. And again, this was another, I took this so personally, and this theme of longing for kids. As I mentioned, I had Kaylee when I was 35. Kevin and I didn't get engaged until I was 30. I didn't meet him until I was 26. So I was actually considered a geriatric mother when I went into the hospital to give birth for the first time. They have a different word for that now. They don't call us geriatric mothers anymore. I can't remember what the word was, but I remember laughing when I heard that, geriatric mother, because Kaylee's due date was like 2 weeks after my 35th birthday. And actually, I have a polycystic ovary syndrome, and I share this with other people because I really think it deserves to be better known, polycystic ovary syndrome, because it does have big repercussions, big effects on fertility for women. And I was very, very lucky that I was able to overcome it with dietary changes and a very short course of an anti-diabetes drug. And there's a doctor at the Vic that whenever I ran into him for years after, I would introduce him as the doctor who got me pregnant, because he was the guy who was the expert in PCOS women with polycystic ovary syndrome and methods to treat them. So I talk about this so that people are more aware of that. So I share Elizabeth Orchard's struggle on that level, and it ended so happily for me, and it did not end so well for Kev. I didn't suffer miscarriages, by the way. It just took us 2 years to get pregnant. So she is so driven by her need to nurture this boy, to be able to nurture somebody. And this boy presents itself, this neighbor boy, Liam, and they become so attached to him. And he, comes into their lives so completely that she ends up abducting him and ends up serving time for this and being prosecuted. And this is revealed to us kind of a surprise. I was quite shocked by that it escalated to abduction. But I kind of understand the motivation. I don't think I would have abducted someone, but I understand it. And then, of course, Liam's mother, Annette, from a motherhood point of view, I remember those days when the kids were little. I remember what it's like to be feeling completely like, I'm not going to get through this. I cannot be a mother. This is, I wanted this. Why did I want this? And not having the wherewithal to overcome and just feeling like you're at the end of the rope where you want to send the 3-year-old over to the neighbor family, and you're willing to do that because you're just looking for some time to think or to take a shower or whatever. So I get her. I didn't find her a very appealing character, but I get that position that she had 3 kids, pregnant with twins, going nuts. I understand kind of that situation. And, there are other little references to motherhood throughout that I think people at different points of life may have picked up on. Just since my kids got older, I think I wouldn't have recognized this before, but I recognized in the wife of Susan, who's the wife of the handyman, Jim. Jim keeps nagging Liam, come for dinner, come for dinner, because the house is so quiet because Cal was away at school. And this couple, the handyman, Jim, and his wife, Susan, are dealing with empty nest syndrome. And this is something else that mothers go through. And this didn't hit Kev and I until our son went away to school for a couple of years. And our son ended up living with my parents in Kingston for 2 years while he took a college degree in Kingston. So it wasn't as if he was anywhere really far. We could go and visit him. I knew he was in good hands and someone was watching over him, but still that empty nest. Of course, by then Kaylee was well established in her education in Ottawa. So I think the author hit all the major life cycles of parents through the book, the longing to be a parent, to become a mother that some of us experience, not all women, because many women have different experiences and aspirations in life. The reality of motherhood that we maybe thought, I didn't sign up for this, I didn't know. No one can ever warn you, by the way. The reality, the regrets, the empty nest syndrome. I think she hits kind of all those. And finally, I want to talk about the ending, because our author has had to talk about the ending because she's been asked in some interviews about the ending. And she has said, and I think she's been asked about it because I think maybe some critical reviewers, like people writing for literary magazines and newspapers and stuff like that, I think they did not like that element of hope that our story brings us to at the end, with Rose back. Thank God she's back. Yes, we know she's deeply traumatized. She doesn't speak for days. She's almost, almost comatose when she's brought back. So deeply traumatized she was by her experiences at the hand of human traffickers in Toronto. By the way, Kaylee's work has taken her through several incarnations. Her undergrad degree is in criminology, and she has a master's in international affairs with an emphasis on intelligence and counterterrorism. And she does investigative work now for one of the big banks. And if you think human trafficking is not happening in Canada, she could tell you stories from morning to night about how they're finding it in every city in Canada, every big city in Canada, including Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver. Women being exploited by men, very young women. She through the course of her work, learned of a case of a 16-year-old girl pimped out by a pimp, and herself became the pimp to a 15-year-old girl. So human trafficking, the experiences that Rose has at 16, they're happening, they're still happening, and it's terrible. And it's so bizarre to me that she's learning more about this by working for a bank, but it's one of the things that she does, because you follow the money, and that's a lot of money in that. Anyway, so we have, as I digress majorly, we have Rose home. We have Liam opening his heart to love. We have, I think, Diane, the mother of Rose, maybe wanting to start her relationship anew with her daughter after it really went off the rails. We have Joe, the librarian, having met Liam, seeing the possibilities. And you know what? We have Elizabeth Orchard reunited in the afterlife with her husband, because that, you could tell that's what she was looking forward to at that point in her life was seeing him again. She was speaking to him with such longing to talk to him again. So I think you could classify this not as strictly a happy ending, because it's terrible for Rose, and the angst will probably stay with Clara, and the angst and upheaval for quite a while. But we have this positive ending. And I think for that reason, our author was asked a lot of questions about this. A Globe and Mail review, by the way, called it a measured minor key redemption for Liam in this story. Mary Lawson has admitted this was a gentler ending than any of her previous 3 books. And she said, I thought that might be evidence that I'm getting old and sentimental. I don't know. I mean, maybe only she can tell about that. But having, gone through the pandemic with so much loss and so much upheaval and so much time spent away from the people we love and so many restrictions, wasn't it nice to read a positive story? And I think, I see heads nodding around the table in some of our, our attendees. This is, I really found it refreshing after so much negativity for 2, coming up on 3 years. Wasn't it nice to see a positive ending and ending with hope? Liam, in addition to, of course, the relationship that he's opening himself up to with Jo, has decided to stay in the community, and he's starting to be welcome there. The handyman makes room for him, offers him a job, doesn't pay a lot, but he's going to be working. We see through little bits of action that he's starting to be accepted as a regular at that cafe, that not very good cafe, it seems, by the staff there who seemingly were so dismissive and grumpy when he first started going there. He's starting to be accepted through his restaurant visit. So for him, this is opening up a new life. Cal, the son of the handyman, took Liam's advice, goes back to school. Good for him. Gonna end up being a vet. Maybe he'll be back in Solace eventually. Maybe he won't, but at least he's thought about it and he settled on a path for himself, which seems to be pretty promising. Jim is and his wife Susan are trying to reach out and establish this relationship with Liam, come to dinner. They're looking for connections in the community. That's positive. So I like the ending, and I'm happy that the author made these choices. One other reviewer named Michael Peterman said, while there is much darkness, it favors a kindlier view of human possibilities and aspirations. And a review in the Toronto Star said, the story encourages hope, roots for redemption, and grants enlightenment for its characters without for a moment denying life's complexity or hardships or forgetting about humankind's capacity for self-delusion and misguided choices. So that to me is pretty accurate. It is not a completely gold-plated happy ending. It's not like a love boat, right off into the sunset type of ending, but it is an ending with promise, with possibilities. And I like that. And I appreciated that. And I feel that I needed that, especially after we were kept not knowing all the way through about what happened to Rose. So I will leave you with my favorite line. And it doesn't come from the book. It comes from a Globe and Mail interview with Mary Lawson. She was talking about how she struggled. It's not even about this book, actually. It's how she struggled to get her first novel, Crow Lake, published. And it's about that sister that I mentioned, Eleanor, who she consults and relies on for early inputs into her book. She had decided for Crow Lake that she needed kind of a hell baby, is what she called it. And Eleanor is her younger sister. So she decided to base the baby, who was so challenging, on Eleanor, but she figured, okay, if I'm going to write this hell baby, I better make sure I get Eleanor's permission for this. And Eleanor said yes, but it was because she figured the book would never get published. So she didn't really care. Oh yeah, base the hell baby on me, that's fine. And at the same time, Mary Lawson thought the book would never get published either. So she thought, okay, yeah, I'll do it because I don't have, really high hopes. But this is what she says. This is the book that ended up being translated into 28 languages. She said she was basing that feeling of, the failure, assumed failure. I had 55 years of failure before Crow Lake was finally accepted. To this day, if something heavy drops through the letterbox, I get this shudder because I assume it is a rejected manuscript. So I think that is hope for all of us who are, at any age, not just at 55, which is how old she was when she published Crow Lake. Anyone struggling again to try new things, whatever they are, and maybe feeling setbacks or not being accepted. This is her message of hope to all of us at what word can I use? Because 55, you're not a senior, you're not in advanced age, midlife and above, midlife and beyond, who are trying new things. Keep trying, because there is hope. And I will leave you with that.
If anyone has any questions in the room, or if you have any questions online, you can type them into the Q&A function and we'll make sure we ask the questions.
I have one comment. I found that Clara's mother, who was very distraught about the child that was missing, paid almost no attention to Clara, who was also her child and who was going through a very hard time. And I would think that the mother may be thinking she's lost her child, but what about the child that's there? She totally ignores her. And I felt it wasn't in keeping with a distraught, she is distraught, but still not providing anything for the remaining child.
Yeah, I think you can make an argument about that. When I was talking about Kevin and I at our State of the Union address and the regrets, one of our great regrets is that while Kaylee was taking up so much of our time during her teen years, our younger son, we did not pay a lot of attention to. And that's one of our regrets. And I would say, having had the experience myself, when you're in the midst of that, you don't necessarily recognize that. You have tunnel vision. It's like tunnel vision. You're so worried about this one child going off the rails to possibly a terrible future that you don't see. So yes, I think she absolutely was neglecting that child.
There's also, like, I'm speaking from personal history, that sometimes when your focus is only on one child, the other child manages somehow without the close affection and scrutiny and whatever. But the child does end up going into adulthood with scars.
Yeah, that's obviously what we worried about. But our son ended up being his reaction to the whole thing was being like the quiet, trouble-free child, So we've talked to him about it. We've talked to him and expressed our regrets that we weren't more attentive to his needs during that period. Then Kaylee went away for school at 17, and he probably hated us being so in his grill, up in his grill about so many things. Because I think we overcompensated, having known that we failed. Yeah.
To your point, I also felt there was a parallel between the way that Clara was sort of ignored and the way that Liam was ignored. It was subtle, but it was there.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I agree that I don't know that I agree that he would never be capable of love without therapy, maybe. But I don't know that I agree that would be the one and only final decision that could be made, because if he found somebody that he could really relate to, then maybe that would be the answer for him.
Yeah, I agree.
He wasn't as negative about that.
We have a question online, if I can just interject here. This is from Judy online. She says, Liam's mother wasn't just overwhelmed. She seemed to be nasty to him, but not to the other children. She was deliberately mean to him. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think she was. You know, there's only so much you can chalk up to being like the frazzled parent. That's why I mentioned her character in it, you know, a combination of circumstances and character, because I didn't like her very much, that character. I did feel that she was mean. I did feel that it was, there was something going on, you know, and sometimes you see that in family dynamics with a parent more comfortable parenting the girls or parenting the boys, or, you know, whatever, or the different parenting the older child and not the younger child, or sometimes you see that, but I did feel that she was not a very nice person.
Not knowing anything about the book when I picked it up, when Rose disappeared, I thought I was going to be reading a book about some of the Aboriginal ladies who go missing and unfortunately in many cases never come back. So I got halfway through the book before I realized that wasn't the story.
Yeah. Again, that sense of relief, she came back, or she was brought back, actually, she was rescued. Oh, I won't find it.
I also disagree that there's no hope. And the way I interpreted that scene between Liam and his ex, was she was describing their transactional relationship and kickstarted him into a new relationship. Like, oh, okay, this is what I've had. Perhaps I can do better just as well. So he had nothing to lose, really, to try another relationship rather than go back. You know, to me, it was like, she framed it so well. That was my point, because that's what happens in life. Yeah, you can analyze somebody here and analyze the next person there, but it depends on the context. And then she described that, she set that context so well that he was able to give it a try because he had nothing to lose.
I also think it was a big relief that he didn't go back to her in terms of when I was reading, I was because you know, that's how people get stuck in like running the hamster wheel in relationships. You know, you don't get a chance to really think about what brought you there and to step off the hamster wheel and try maybe something else. So I was very relieved.
I think we had another question.
No, I had the same thought that she brought up when his ex-wife came up to Solace and what happened.
Yeah.
I have to say you were terrific.
Oh, thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
It was so beautifully put, everything that you said and everything that you talked about.
Thanks, you're very kind, but I did find this an easy book
I love it.
to internalize. You know, when I talk about I internalize everything now, you know, it's a little painful to live through that tension until we see the denouement of our characters, but yeah.
I had a thought that I found it strange that Liam really didn't remember her or the time that he spent with her, because it seems like it was so intense and so, even though he was 3 or 4, I just found it hard to believe that he had no real recollection of Elizabeth in that time.
Yeah. I don't know how to explain that.
It makes sense because you don't really remember. Yeah.
I don't, but I know people.
They can figure very prominently. Because he also befriended the.
In the end, yeah,
Yeah.
that's how our action closes. Hello, Moses.
Perhaps the title was the resolution in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
I didn't hear what she said.
The title is the resolution. I ended up looking up the definition of solace to make sure that I was kind of interpreting it correctly. Let's see if I. Yeah, I've lost, oh, to give comfort or consolation in a time of distress or sadness. So I do think that applies to Liam. I think, I don't know whether the town supplied the solace to Diane, the mother of Rose and Clara, but the action did in the end. I mean, she got her daughter back, even though they've got a long road to hoe, helping her to recover from that. To make cheerful, to amuse, to soothe.
So if there are no more questions, it's a pleasure for me on behalf of the Books and Tea Committee and the Hashomayim to thank you again for your comprehensive, personal, thorough, incredible review of the book, of this book. I think we all learned a lot. I think you just pulled everything together, and your personal insights really helped a great deal. So thank you. I hope that we'll see all of you next spring when we do our next review. I want to thank Robin for all your technical expertise and all the help that you gave us. And thank you everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to see so many faces.
Yes.
Thank you.